So as I'm starting this episode, I'm feeling myself choking on my disgust with, 1,000 rebuttals all coming up at once, all based on this short video that I saw on YouTube with John Mearsheimer on the Piers Morgan show. So if you don't know who John Mearsheimer is, he's a political scientist, a professor at the University of Chicago, and he's got a pretty dark worldview. At base, he thinks that, it's just power, and that all great powers behave essentially the same. They just reach for more power. So if you listen to John Mearsheimer, at least on the face of it, there really is no difference for John Mearsheimer between Russia and the United States. The sort of guy I would love to ask, well, just go live in Russia then. But John Mearsheimer has been used, it's very clear, in the last year, 2 years, to justify the Russian position, to deconstruct any, noble ideas that the West might have in terms of supporting Ukraine against, Russian tyranny. He thinks, at some level that the West is responsible. NATO encroachment caused the Russians to do what the Russians had to do, which is to go in and slaughter women and children and kidnap kids and bomb maternity wards and children's hospitals and torture people and hunt people in Kherson with attack drones because, you know, NATO encroachment. So I'm just going to play this short clip by John Mearsheimer just to show what a piece of shit he is and to show how easily, our own, leading lights, our own institutions can be used against us. He's at the University of Chicago. I'm from Chicago. Um, People mostly don't realize that the University of Chicago is actually the premier university in the United States. The Ivy League gets all the press and notoriety, but the University of Chicago has produced more Nobel laureates than any other university in the world. And so to have a guy like John Mearsheimer, who, forget whatever his, you know, little paradigm is, the way he's used, the way he's rolled out is to give lower level intellectuals just enough to put their consciences to sleep and say, oh, it's not really Russia's fault. Oh, Russia's not my enemy. If it wasn't for NATO overreach, there would have been no war in Ukraine. And not accepting the obvious fact, the facts that are right in front of our face. And I'll play this little short clip and then I'll show how, oh, fuck, it's so misleading. It's so insidious. How it's debunkable just on the known facts, just on what's in front of our own faces. The Russians invaded Ukraine because the Ukrainians stood up to their puppet president in 2012. There were massive protests. Hundreds of thousands of people traveled from all over the country, protested in Kiev. Uh, Viktor Yanukovych fled the country and he was voted. Now, this is very important. He was voted out of office by a supermajority of parliament. And the Russians couldn't have that example on their borders. That's why they invaded. Forget all these other, you know, bullshit excuses. They couldn't have a functioning democracy on their borders or their system of corruption and repression would fall. That's why they invaded Ukraine. But when you bring in a guy like John Mearsheimer, has all these academic credentials, people will just take argument by authority because it's the one that, most fits with their, momentary personal worldview. All these bros and all their bro podcast knowledge, all these Trump supporters, for whom it's just easier to roll over, split the globe with the Russians, and, just go back to might makes right. There is no right, there's just might. So I'm just going to play this short video. It's obviously Piers Morgan, John Mearsheimer down here, and it's so insidious what he says, the way that it can be used to justify Russian aggression and atrocities. And if this is the road we're going to go down, we will lose all democracy and we'll all live under autocrats and oligarchs.
Why self-style yourself as leader of the free world? You either are leader of the free world, and America still has, I think, half the world's military firepower, and obviously one of the biggest economies. You either are that entity, leader of the free world, or you're not. And if you are, then what comes with that is a responsibility to protect freedom and democracy when it comes under attack from totalitarian regimes, I would think.
I think if you look at the history of American foreign policy, it's very hard to make the case that our principal goal has been to protect freedom and democracy. The United States has a rich history of overthrowing democracies around the world, and we have a rich history of siding with some of the world's biggest dictators. So this idea that we're out there protecting freedom and democracy and it's our principal goal, in my opinion, doesn't mesh with reality.
All right. So that just came up today in my YouTube feed, and it's one of those things where I find myself like choking on 1,000 rebuttals. It's such a sanguine and dismissive position that masquerades as intellectual, and it masquerades as historical. The U.S. has a rich tradition of overthrowing democracies and siding with the worst dictators. Like, immediately, what that jumps right over is World War II. We fought World War II to end fascism. We fought World War II at least to, freeze the line of Stalinism. Look, oh my God. Like, look at the difference between West Germany and East Germany. Look at the difference between South Korea and North Korea. Look how much Japan flourished under what would have been, you could have called it U.S. rule, but it was just, U.S. Oh my God. It's like, it's that somebody like this would make an argument like that and just jump over World War II. Look at NATO. There hasn't been a war within Europe since World War II, country against country, except for the recent invasion of Russia into Ukraine because of NATO. So what the fuck are you talking about that we don't have a track record of supporting democracies? We have the democracies that we have because of America. Europe isn't under the Nazis because of America. Asia isn't under the Imperial Japanese because of America. Look at how, this is the same thing that I want to beat back against the alt-left when they call us colonials, and imperials. Look how well the Japanese did under American, not even rule, just tutelage, just under American care. Look at a satellite view of the Korean Peninsula at night and look at South Korea, which is American, and look at North Korea, which was Soviet. Look at the atrocities, the hell on earth that is North Korea, and look at the functioning first world democracy that South Korea is. And then tell me that America doesn't support democracies around the globe. Look at the difference between West Germany, which flourished, and East Germany, which had the Stasi. I mean, it's the sort of thing that makes you just go to fucking Russia, you fucking asshole, if that's what you really fucking believe. So, this is Mearsheimer on Lex Friedman a year ago. I sat through as much of that interview as I possibly could. It had 7.9 million views, almost 8 million views. And we all know how Lex Friedman has been used by the right now. That puts John Mearsheimer is just another nail in the coffin on our conscious, morality around the Ukraine war. Oh no, it's just corrupt powers fighting each other. That was NATO aggression. No, it wasn't. It was the Ukrainian people doing what we want all people on earth to do, which is to stand for liberal democracy, free markets, transparency. I mean, what a fucking asshole. What a traitor. And this is Yuri Bezmenov. I am going to link this in the description. If you get a chance, sit through this. He was a KGB officer who defected. Um, And when his cover was blown, he defected in 1970 because he was appalled at what the Soviets were doing in India. And he came first to Canada, and then his cover was blown. And so he started doing tours and talks in universities on TV and stuff to show how the Russians demoralize over decades their enemies. And yeah, personally, I believe that there's a great chance that Mearsheimer at some level is being used by the Russians. And I know that sounds conspiratorial, but if you sit down and you listen to this interview and you understand who the Russians are and how they work and how they think in decades and centuries, what they do is at the bottom level, at the very minimum, is look for useful idiots like John Mearsheimer, even though he's a professor at the University of Chicago. They find people whose messages undercut our ability to function, our ability to be a leading light, and demoralize. And if you listen to Mearsheimer, he's basically just telling you, don't be stupid, don't be naive. There's no such thing as good and evil. There's only power in the world. And if we're going to do that, we're just going to go the way of the Russians. I mean, look at what the Trump administration is doing right now, abducting people off the streets and sending them to gulags, abducting people off the streets and sending them to these ICE detention facilities, which are psychological torture. And look at the way that they're being used. This is Mearsheimer on Lex Friedman. I'm trying to tell you, there's a game plan behind all this. The guy behind Lex Friedman is Elon Musk, who's been in regular contact with Vladimir Putin, personal phone calls since the beginning of the war, buying U.S. elections. What's the other guy's name? The other PayPal mafia, and I'm too upset to even remember the other guy's name. Peter Thiel, right? These are the guys that are coordinating these messages. They're buying out or otherwise incentivizing and influencing the podcaster sphere. And then they get a useful idiot like John Mearsheimer on, who, God knows, I mean, if I dug into his history, could almost guarantee you that he would have these suspicious Russian ties, that he would have traveled to Russia and that they would have put their intelligence services on them. They would have fed him with prostitutes and alcohol and drugs and found ways to co-opt his message. And when you go on Piers Morgan and you put forward such a pseudo intellectual argument that the US has this rich history of subverting democracies around the world and you overlook World War II, do you know nothing about fucking history? You've never seen a satellite image of the Korean Peninsula at night. You don't know the economic powerhouse that Japan turned into. You don't know how much better West Germany and the economic powerhouse that West Germany was, how much better life was in West Germany than East Germany. And then when you make this allegation that we've overturned um, democracies, if you were to actually notice, he doesn't offer any examples. He just paints with a broad brush. If you were to look at his specific examples, what you would find are third world countries that were either going to go Soviet or they were going to go American. And so we had to back a dictator that kept them from going Soviet. Because what would happen in these fledgling democracies, these so-called democracies that we overturned, is yeah, maybe the people would have voted in that moment, but they would have voted. It would be like North Korea. I mean, just take the Korean people. It would be like having North Korea and they're going to vote for the Kim family, right? That's the democratic will of the people. They're going to vote for the Kim family, or they're going to vote, we can overturn that and have them vote for our guy. Which is the better outcome? The Kim family? Which is the better outcome? Worldwide communism? Which is the better outcome? Look at all these African countries that Western powers left. There's not a single African country that's better off under self rule than by the colonial power that they kicked out. And now you're going to have this really insipid, simplistic argument that we overturn democracies, and you're going to do what? You're going to leave Africa unprotected from the Chinese and the Russians. So who do you want? You want the Chinese and the Russians being the colonial powers in Africa, or do you want the enlightened Western countries that could help build real democracies and real functioning governments in Africa? It's such a piece of shit fucking argument because it's so debunkable on its face. It's so debunkable by what we already know, but it's insidious because it appeals to things that we don't know and we forget the things that are right in our face. World War II and which side you would have been on and rather been on in World War II and which side of the Iron Curtain you would have rather lived in. What are you saying that we don't support democracies when Western Europe, the Western Hemisphere, the NATO countries exist in their stable democratic forms because of U.S. intervention and power? And would you rather have had imperial Japan or democratic Japan? And would you rather have had democratic South Korea? Or would you rather just have all of Korea under the horrific authority of the Kim regime? I mean, it just boggles the mind and makes it so hard to push back against. But that's the insidious fucking message that's out there. And that's the way ultimately that the Kremlin manipulates US politics because they get assholes like this to change minds. I mean, what's his fucking argument based on that? Right? Okay, so we've overthrown democracy. So, all right, so what's the next step? We just let everything go to it's just might makes right now, and there is no right and there is no democracy. You're just asking me to let go of every ideal. And if that's the case, what's your next step? And by the way, John Mearsheimer was a huge proponent of the Iraq War, just so you know. And any legitimate case that he had where we illegitimately destabilized and overthrew a country, it would have been his side of the political aisle that did it. It would have been the MAGAs, it would have been the Trumpers, it would have been the Republicans, it would have been the neocons, it would have been Bush Cheney, it would have been Bush number one, it would have been Reagan. He's just asking you to give up your soul. That's all he's asking you.